created with PodMate.
So, okay, picture this. You've got this incredibly dusty, cramped attic in a medieval Cairo synagogue, right? And it's just packed to the rafters with hundreds of thousands of discarded scraps of paper just sitting there totally untouched for literally 1,000 years. And when historians actually got in there and opened it up, I mean, it wasn't just old prayer books. They found business receipts, actual love letters, legal agreements, this messy, beautiful map of how real people survived in a world that was constantly shifting under their feet. And honestly, that's really what we're talking about today. How this tiny exiled group fractured into these totally different worlds, went through some of the absolute worst moments in human history, and somehow, I don't know, completely remade modern life. It's this wild mix of deep splits, radical ideas, and just sheer unbelievable resilience. So if we go back to, say, the late 8th century, the Jewish world basically splits into two huge branches. Down in Spain, you have the Sephardic Jews, and they're living through this massive, celebrated golden age, navigating life under both Muslim and Christian rulers. They weren't just sitting in synagogues either. They're trading, writing poetry, translating classical philosophy. I mean, think of Maimonides, the legendary doctor and philosopher over in Egypt. He had this massive challenge. How do you take ancient agricultural laws from the Torah and apply them to medieval global trade? And those Cairo-Geniza documents actually prove how he did it, basically adapting the legal rules so merchants could actually, thrive and do business. But then, okay, turn your gaze up north, Rhineland, Eastern Europe. The Ashkenazi Jews are dealing with a completely different, honestly, much darker reality. They're incredibly isolated, persecuted, cut off, so they build this ultra-tight-knit, self-reliant culture. They're speaking Yiddish, developing their own specific rituals like wrapping their Torahs in cloth rather than using hard cases like the Sephardim. And there's just this constant, heavy sense of being vulnerable. It's just a classic example of how the exact same heritage can split into these two totally different ways of seeing the world and surviving it, but then, boom. 1492. We all know the school rhyme about Columbus, right? But for Spain's Jewish community, that exact year was an absolute train wreck. Ferdinand and Isabella put out the Alhambra Decree, basically convert to Catholicism or get out. Just like that, centuries of this incredibly vibrant Sephardic culture were wiped off the map overnight. I mean, where do you even go when you're kicked out of a place your family called home for 1,500 years? Well, this unlikely savior steps up. Sultan Bayezid II of the Ottoman Empire. He welcomes the Sephardic refugees with open arms. He even mocked the Spanish king, saying something like, "You're impoverishing your own country while enriching mine." And honestly, he was totally right. Take a city like Salonika. It turns into this massive, thriving hub of trade and culture, basically operating as a self-governing Jewish city. Talk about rising from the ashes. Now, let's fast forward a bit to 17th century Amsterdam. You've got this young guy, Baruch Spinoza, and he starts asking some, let's call them highly dangerous questions. He looks at traditional religion and goes, wait, what if God and nature are actually the exact same thing? He's arguing for free thought, saying church and state need to be totally separate. In the 1600s, it was mind-blowing. For his traditional Portuguese Jewish community, this is absolutely terrifying. So they issue this massive excommunication, the herem, and completely cut him off. But here's the real twist. Spinoza doesn't go convert to Christianity. He just exists as this secular, unaffiliated thinker. He basically invents this whole new way of being Jewish without the religious practice, laying the groundwork for the modern Enlightenment. Fast forward centuries, and he's deeply influencing guys like Albert Einstein. But while Western Europe is getting this taste of Enlightenment hope, over in Eastern Europe, the 19th century is, well, it's a waking nightmare. Millions of Ashkenazi Jews are trapped in the Russian Empire's Pale of Settlement. And then come the pogroms, these brutal state-sanctioned violent riots. Places like Kishinev and Proskurov, they just become synonymous with absolute horror and slaughter. Imagine watching your neighbors turn on you, and the state is just letting it happen or even helping. It completely shattered any illusion that Jews could ever just safely assimilate into European society. Millions flee to America, but it also sparks this entirely new movement. It convinces this secular Viennese journalist, Theodor Herzl, that the only real way Jews will ever be safe is if they have their own country, period. He frames political Zionism not as some romantic, far-off religious dream, but as a practical, urgent, modern necessity. And then, of course, the darkest chapter of all, the rise of Nazi Germany and the systematic slaughter of 6 million European Jews. It's so easy to get lost in those huge, unimaginable numbers. But you have to look at how people actually fought back, even in the middle of that absolute hell. Like inside the Warsaw Ghetto, this group called Onik Shabbat secretly documents every single horror, burying the archives in milk cans so the world would eventually find out the truth. And out in the forests, the Bielski brothers take up arms, not just to fight, but to shelter and save hundreds of refugees. It's resistance of the mind and the body, you know? That raw, searing trauma of the Holocaust. It transformed the whole idea of a Jewish state. It wasn't just a political option anymore. It was an absolute, non-negotiable, existential survival mechanism. So, in 1948, Israel is founded. But immediately, it triggers this brutal war with the neighboring Arab states. And along with that war comes this huge, often totally forgotten exodus. Between 1948 and the 70s, nearly 900,000 Jews are forced to flee or are outright expelled from Arab and Islamic lands. Communities in places like Iraq, Yemen, Egypt, they'd been there for thousands of years and suddenly they're just completely dismantled. Like, imagine being airlifted out of Yemen during Operation Magic Carpet, leaving literally everything behind. And where do they go? Mostly straight to Israel. This massive wave of Mizrahi and Sephardic refugees completely shifts Israel's cultural center away from Europe. It turns it into a deeply Middle Eastern society. Then, fast forward in 1967, surrounded by hostile armies, Israel launches a preemptive strike and wins the Six-Day War in, well, exactly 6 days. It completely changes things. Israel becomes this regional superpower, and for Jews in the diaspora, it sparks this massive wave of pride and empowerment. Suddenly, they've got this political leverage, and they use it to fight for others. They launched this global grassroots campaign to free Soviet Jews trapped behind the Iron Curtain. When the USSR finally collapses, over 1 million Russian-speaking Jews make Aliyah to Israel, totally reshaping the economy and tech scene. And right around the same time, you have covert rescues like Operation Solomon airlifting tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews to safety. It's this wild global ingathering of cultures. And when you look at how this community, despite all the trauma, has contributed to the modern world, honestly, it's kind of mind-boggling. You've got Einstein redefining physics, Freud mapping the human mind, Jonas Salk developing the polio vaccine, and this is key, refusing to patent it so anyone could get it. From pacemakers and recombinant DNA to drip irrigation making deserts bloom, there's always this underlying focus on fixing a broken world. And in art, Marc Chagall uses these modernist styles to paint dreamlike memories of his childhood shtetls, preserving this lost world with those vibrant, floating figures. And today, writers are still grappling with those exact same deep, messy questions of heritage, immigration, and memory. But heading into the 2020s, this quiet crisis starts brewing between Israel and the diaspora. It's this fundamental clash of worldviews, particularism versus universalism. Western Jews living in liberal democracies often see their identity through universal values, social justice, pluralism, right? But Israelis dealing with constant security threats naturally prioritize survival and national solidarity. That gap was already getting wider, and then October 7th, 2023 happens. The deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. The brutal Hamas attacks just send this shockwave of raw ancestral trauma through basically every Jewish community on Earth. But the war in Gaza that followed, it's unleashed this terrifying wave of global anti-Semitism, leaving progressive diaspora Jews in this incredibly painful spot. A lot of them feel totally abandoned by the political left they spent decades supporting. Suddenly, they're politically homeless, feeling under siege. It's forced this huge, painful conversation about what survival even means when both your sovereign homeland and your liberal safe havens feel threatened at the exact same time. At the end of the day, this story, it's not some dead museum piece. It's an ongoing, deeply human dialogue between the land and the scattered communities. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you next time.